my extreme pleasure to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Holmes Morton, who I've had the privilege of knowing since I think about 1994. And I think of many words that come to my mind when I think of Holmes Morton. He's an advocate, he is a clinician, he's a researcher, medical formulators, in periodicals, international speaker, pediatrician. The list goes on and on. And I hope that I have the energy and ambition, and I told Holmes this earlier before we were all here, to be doing what he's doing in 10 and 15 years to come. And that is having a passion and mission, ultimately for us and for you, for our children, for each other, and for the rare disease community. His career is long, and so I just went ahead and I Googled a little bit, and I got a few extra facts that I didn't know either about Holmes Morton. And so, of course, his career started back in Philadelphia, where he was Harvard trained, and where he also did his fellowship at University of, in Philadelphia, Children's Hospital. And he co-founded the Clinic for Special Children in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. And not only one clinic, but now a second clinic, which is taking place as we speak in Bellevue, Pennsylvania. The clinic for, it's just the Central Pennsylvania clinic. He also was the Albert Schweitzer Humanitarian Award in 1993, the Smithsonian Institute Award for Innovative Technology in 1998, his Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. The list goes on, and I'm just going to complete it right there and say, and he was a great pediatrician for my children as well. Please let me give you Dr. Holmes Morton.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks for having me come to this. I think these gatherings that mix together professional people and families and patients start conversations, and we know that most of what really takes place in a meeting like this that's significant is not in listening to Dr. Ronaldo and I, but in the conversation that the talks provoke. And so I thought I'd just give you more of a story today than a scientific talk. We all have our slides, and we just about can't get by without them. But don't get so distracted by the slides that you sort of miss the stories. And I think one of the concerns that I have at my stage of a career is that the old-fashioned model of a physician who primarily works taking care of children with these problems and is not a slave to grants, is not constantly worried about the politics of an institution, but rather works as a practitioner to focus upon the care of the individual patient. And that really the research that we do is in many ways case study. And yes, I'm impressed by Dr. Ronaldo's data. And I know that I think it was Jerry Botley who said, data isn't the plural of the anecdote. Chuck Haymeyer told me that yesterday, and I liked it. But what I want to leave you with is the impression that a lot of what I have learned that has been helpful to children with these unusual troubles we work with really come from the struggles to take care of the individual patient and to understand the natural history of the disease and episodes of illness. And to do that, you've really kind of got to be in the trenches with the parents. You guys know a lot about these diseases, their natural history, how they affect people day to day. And a lot of the really important observations that led to insight and understanding and treatment protocols came from working with a group of people who aren't necessarily highly educated in science, and I'm talking about the plain people who have 8th grade educations, but who nonetheless can be great observers. And if you take the time and have the resources in terms of a laboratory to sort of move forward with the ideas you have working with patients, sometimes you gain insights that are very important. So that's kind of the message. This is the old clinic. This is the clinic in Strasbourg that my wife and I set up in 1989. And that quote there says, the everyday practice of medicine is the frontier of genetic medicine. And it was really meant to say that part of the problem that you face as parents and we face as clinicians is how do we provide care for people in the place they live. And one of the good things we did back in 1989 was move out of the grant race. I left Johns Hopkins University at that time. I didn't stay at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, but rather went to Lancaster County and set up a mass spectrometer and a amino acid analyzer. And it's still probably the only place you can get your leucine level measured while you wait. So you can imagine what that's like to come in, get maple syrup urine disease, talk to a clinician, have us draw blood, and 20 minutes later have an amino acid profile that helps us make decisions about how to manage your disease. And sometimes whether you need to go to the hospital or not, but sometimes whether we just need to change the diet. And to have that capability out in an Amish cornfield was something that was unique. But it made a lot of sense, didn't it? So before the clinic was there, the Mennonite people of Lancaster County with maple syrup urine disease, if anybody as a clinician bothered to draw a blood sample and send it to Philadelphia, you'd get your level about 3 weeks later. That's like checking your blood sugar and waiting 3 weeks to adjust your insulin. Nothing made sense about that. And it made a lot of sense for the Mennonite community to pool some resources, buy an HPLC, have us set up amino acid analysis, and begin the task of really understanding the natural history of maple syrup urine disease and in terms of the day-to-day activities of the patients who had that disorder. And I think that model, that way of working was of fundamental importance to solving the problems of that disease and glutaric aciduria. And I think ultimately it will be a very important model in understanding, gaining insight into propionic acidemia. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about how that came about and a little bit of history too. So here's an observation that has to impress Dr. Rinaldo. So when I was a fellow at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the whole group of people in the metabolic group followed 150 patients, I think 157. And more than half of those were followed by Rick Kelly alone. And there were 6 full-time physicians, and the only autosomal recessive disorder that we saw from the plain community were 10 Mennonite children with maple syrup urine disease. Now, this was 1978. Victor McCusick published his book, The Medical Genetic Conditions of the Amish, which sort of made the population famous in terms of studying genetic disease within an inbred population. The first Amish patient I saw as a fellow was on June the 19th, 1988, 30 years ago, June the 19th. And this little boy had glutaric aciduria type 1. None of us at CHOP had ever seen that disorder. So I did the obvious thing, which was to drive out to Amish country, meet this family, and say, what's the story with him? What was he like? And the parents said, well, he was pretty well until about 12 months of age. He got this illness, and then he developed cerebral palsy. Well, it's not the way cerebral palsy develops, you know. And it was really that family who said, I said, are there other children like Danny in the community? And they said, oh yes, we have a circle letter. We all know each other. This is the cerebral palsy of the Amish. And so I spent the summer just going from farm to farm, gathering up urine and running organic acids in the lab at CHOP, and diagnosed about 20 cases of glutaric aciduria type 1. And those are the first Amish patients identified. And at that time, it was thought to be a pretty rare disease that sort of tripled the world's population. And what was interesting about that is the parents could tell me the day and the time of day when those children became disabled, and usually the illness that provoked the disability. Well, anybody who studies these diseases, an episodic illness that results in injury like that suggests the disease is treatable. You just have to understand what that injury is doing, what precipitates it. And so a lot of my life has been spent trying to understand, well, what is it that causes these patients who were previously relatively stable to suddenly develop a stroke or a seizure or heart failure or coma or all the problems that you guys know about. Today, this slide's a little dated already. There are 3 pediatricians at the Clinic for Special Children. I'm now working at this new place, but Strauss and the group there's 16 people working at that clinic now. They've not had trouble inspiring young people to come there and work, which is really important. That clinic follows 2,700 patients from these populations that were just 40 minutes away from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. CHOP was the only place doing organic acids and amino acids, the only place really managing these disorders in that time. So this gives you some sense of what was being overlooked. 2,700 patients with 190 different recessive disorders. 190, that number increases every month now with the new technology. For all these different disorders, Eric Puffenberger has identified the disease-causing mutation for the biochemical disorders and the molecular disorders and developed tests that take 2 hours to do and cost $35. Pretty nice. Expanded newborn screening started a little earlier in Pennsylvania than it did some places. 1993-94, tandem mass spectrometry first came online, and that program, the expanded newborn screening, was started in Pennsylvania in large part because of the conditions within the Amish and Mennonite community. And Ed Naylor, who set up Neogen, knew that he would have a lot of positives if he set up the technology, and it could be kind of a demonstration program. Today, there are over 500 patients followed that clinic that were diagnosed through expanded newborn screening. So that's a big change. So what difference has the clinic made? Well, in part, it's just allowed us to understand how underserved these populations are. Is it only Amish and Mennonite who have genetic diseases? I don't see any of them in the room here. Yeah, I mean, really, these conditions that we see in Lancaster County just came from Europe 300 years ago. I mean, these are just European mutations. So the variant of propionic acidemia that I'll tell you a little bit about is found all over the United States. About 5% of people in Europe carry that variant. Glutaric aciduria, if I see a child from Texas with that disease, about a third of the time they have the so-called Amish mutation. MCAD in the Mennonites is the same Delta 985 that's found in the general population. Interesting enough, MCAD is not found in the Amish. So one of the things you have to realize about these inbred populations is that there are some disorders that are common, like maple syrup urine disease in the Mennonites. That's not found in the Amish. Glutaric aciduria type 1 is found in the Amish. It's not found in the Mennonites. And of the 7,000 recessive diseases in the human catalog, we only have to worry about 55 in Big Valley. it actually makes your job a lot easier. You got a catalog. You know what the mutations are. You know how to diagnose these things. You know what their natural history is. And you provide a medical home where people will be taken care of so that when they come in, they're taken care of by staff who just simply know what the problem is. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of going to a new place. I tried to get somebody at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia interested in working with me about the cardiomyopathy of propionic acidemia, and I called down there and I said, one of the cardiologists there be interested in learning about propionic acidemia, and they said, we have 64 attending pediatric cardiologists. So anytime one of your patients comes to CHOP, they're going to see a different cardiologist. And nobody's going to accumulate any experience about that disease. And I said, well, you know, I know of 80 people, 80 patients in the Amish population that are homozygous for the same mutation. And we know a lot about the natural history. And it's just simply that the way some medical centers are organized, no one individual gets a lot of personal experience following these diseases. I'm talking about following them in terms of a caregiver. We can all read about it. We can also do some interesting research. But I'm talking about the nuts and bolts stuff that makes a difference to patients and parents. So that's part of what these clinics have done. And yes, there's a clinic in Lancaster. There's this new clinic called the Central Pennsylvania for Special Needs Children and Adults. I see people sort of look up. It's a big problem, isn't it? I've been doing this for 30 years. It was 30 years ago, I went to Lancaster County to see Danny, a kid with enteric aciduria. And the children I took care of in those early days are no longer children. And where do they get cared for? Even at the clinic in Lancaster, where Dr. Strauss manages now, they really set a limit on age 18. We do see a few patients with maple syrup urine disease and other conditions that just have nowhere else to go. But it's not a clinic for adults, and that's badly needed. So the model in Big Valley is to have a clinic for children and adults. There are two clinics like ours in Ohio that were started, one in about 1998 and the other more recently, the New Leaf Clinic. Both run by former students, or at least Dr. Wang, who's from China, got interested in doing this kind of work, working with those with special needs, through an article that I wrote called Through My Window. A few people might have seen that article. It was published in Pediatrics in 94, December of 94. And it's been very influential, and Hen in particular read the article and said, wow, I really like what Morton does, I want to do this. And so he runs the clinic in Middlefield, Ohio. They have a fantastic lab. He has a guy also from China. The official language of the lab seems to be Chinese. And they do a lot of molecular biology. It's one of the few places where you get panels of diagnostic workups for things like spasticity and mental retardation and seizures that are sort of tailored for the plain community. So again, it's sort of continued in the spirit of providing a local service in terms of general care, but with extraordinary resources to make that service a little better than it would be otherwise. And then there's a clinic like ours in Indiana that was first started as a center for hemophilia by Amy Shapiro, who came out of Riley Children's Hospital, realized there was a large number of cases of hemophilia in the Amish population, set up a clinic to provide care for them. That led to a birthing center, and more recently has led to a genetics clinic where people within the community come there to have their genetic diseases taken care of. In 2012, I went to Wisconsin and gave a lecture at Madison. And out of that lecture came a clinic in western Wisconsin that was set up by a family practitioner who I met then, but was also supported heavily by the University of Wisconsin. And we recruited Katie Williams, who came to the clinic in Lancaster to work because she got inspired by that talk. It's pretty unusual to get that kind of feedback from a talk, but it was, it was a good experience. And now there's a